Imagine trying to leave your apartment, and this is what you're met with. You just took out a huge loan after working your whole life to buy your own apartment, and this is what it looks like. And when you bring it up to the developer's contractor, you're told, serves you right. Today's episode is sponsored by Ground News. More on this later. Maybe your home doesn't crumble, but as you're driving, it's not just homes that crumble, but infrastructure as well. It seems like everywhere you go, things are just collapsing. And if they're not collapsing, they're flooding. Sometimes, even with raw sewage. Almost every collapse brings talk of change, but then it happens again. And the outcome has been tragic. In Chinese media, these construction disasters became known as tofu dreg projects. Shoddy work named after the crumbs left over when making tofu. It's a hauntingly apt description of the kind of substandard construction that led to a tragic collapse in June of 2021. Just after midday, a modest but tall private house crumbled. Local emergency services responded swiftly, but for some, it was too late. A resident recalled the heart-wrenching cries of the landlord trapped within the ruins, desperately calling for help. 8 people were rescued from the rubble and transported to local hospitals. About 4 months later, the local government completed the investigation, which found the house faced serious problems right from the ground up. The foundation of the self-built house was weak due to poor soil and missing reinforced steel in key areas. Nearby construction disturbed the soil, causing it to shift and crack the foundation. The building's design, with its tall, narrow brick concrete structure, lacked stiffness, making it unstable and prone to collapse. It was a disaster waiting to happen that had cost 5 people their lives and left 7 injured. The investigation resulted in strict actions against 5 people involved in the construction. Additionally, 20 local government officials faced consequences for negligence, ranging from serious warnings to removal from office. But it would not be the last deadly collapse between 2021 to date. In fact, the most recent incident was just a few weeks ago. In the early hours of May 1, 2024, the tranquility around the remote Meilong Expressway in Guangdong is shattered by a sudden catastrophe. More than a dozen vehicles plunge into a deep, fiery pit as a section of the road gives way. The chaos that ensues is unimaginable, with flames lighting up the night sky and smoke billowing into the air. As rescue operations were carried out, the devastating toll began to emerge. Could it be yet another tofu incident? The authorities' tight control over information and crisis management could not ease the public concerns about systemic neglect and lack of transparency. The immediate rescue operation was massive, involving over 500 personnel. Their mission was clear but daunting: save lives and recover what they could from the wreckage. A WeChat account, Constructive Opinions, raised doubts about the official numbers of casualties and how well the rescue efforts were being handled. Just 2 days later, people saw burned car wrecks covered with tarps, which increased criticism and concerns about the investigation's thoroughness and the lack of transparency in the death toll. Before the investigation even began, experts pointed to the poor construction quality of the highway, which was less than 10 years old. Investigators discovered several issues with the construction. Layers were not filled or compacted properly, and the materials used were not the correct size specifications. Instead of building bridges, the road was built on the slopes, and there wasn't enough reinforcement or protection. At the same time, international media coverage showed varying interpretations and political implications of the collapse. But what does that actually mean? I used our sponsor, Ground News, to find out and get a broader perspective on the topic. This is how it works. The news of the highway incident has been covered by more than 227 international sources. Ground News is a website and app, and they're on a mission to give readers an easy, data-driven, objective way to read the news. In the coverage details, you can see that 32% of the sources lean left and 20% right. Every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of the political bias, ownership, and headlines, all rated by 3 independent news monitoring organizations. You can compare headlines to see different framing. In our case, this right-leaning headline describes a geological natural disaster, while left-leaning news emphasize that the information comes from the Chinese state media. Ownership information shows how many of the outlets are owned by media conglomerates. For our story, it's 54%. The last feature I want to show you is the blind spot feed, with stories that you might have missed because they were only covered by one side. If you value critical thinking and balanced reporting, give Ground News a try. Go to ground.news/dark records or use the link in the video description to subscribe today. If you sign up through my link, you'll get 40% off the Vantage plan, which is what I use to get unlimited access to all their features. I think Ground News is doing important work, and I hope you'll check them out. Since the collapse came after heavy rain, it's believed poor drainage caused the soil to become unstable, leading to landslides that compounded the disaster. There have been no official updates about the collapse since the last casualty report on May 2nd. It confirmed that there had been 30 injuries and 48 deaths. Less than a year prior, China was shocked by another particularly tragic collapse. On a summer day, a routine volleyball practice at a middle school turns into a nightmare. The girls' team is training in the gym when a deafening crash echoes through, sending debris and dust into the air. The roof has collapsed. Of the 19 people inside, only 4 managed to escape. Screams and cries ring out from those trapped. Nearby residents quickly dialed emergency services, and panic spread as people rushed to the scene. The first rescue units arrived within minutes and began removing debris in search of survivors, with more teams and equipment intensifying the operation as the evening drew closer. Onlookers gathered, hoping for news. As night fell, portable lighting was set up to continue the rescue. Soon, the first bodies were recovered. Over 19 hours later, the last trapped victim was retrieved. The death toll was now 11 people. 10 young volleyball players and their coach, with 7 others injured. But authorities made the identification process dreadful for the parents, trying to find out if their children were alive. Videos surfaced of grieving parents confronting government officials at hospitals, where they were pressured to sign documents before they could even identify their children's bodies. The lack of clear communication and the push to sign documents they didn't fully understand fueled suspicions of a cover-up. To top it off, social media posts and tributes, including from survivors, were heavily censored, adding to the outrage and criticism of authorities for their lack of compassion and transparency. As details emerged, public outrage grew. They had one crucial question: how did this happen? After being built in 1997, the gym had undergone multiple repairs over the years to improve waterproofing and insulation. But the repairs didn't stick to design specifications, which increased the roof's load. Just 4 months before the collapse, the government initiated an inspection program. However, whether the gym was checked or not is still unclear. Besides this, perlite was being stored on the roof during a nearby construction project. It's a mineral commonly used in construction, but it is also highly absorbent. Not long before the roof came crashing down, dark clouds gathered, and it started to rain heavily. Unbeknownst to those inside, the perlite began to soak up the water, making it heavier and heavier. The official report from 2024 revealed the mineral was stored illegally, but the focus of official communications was often on technical explanations and legal actions, rather than addressing public grief and accountability, which is consistent with efforts to control the narrative. There haven't been any statements about how the devastating parents were treated, or how this slipped through the cracks for years. This was especially infuriating, since it was not the first time that students died in poorly built schools. When the 2008 Sichuan earthquake hit with a 7.9 magnitude, schools turned into death traps. Nearly 7,000 classrooms collapsed, leaving over 5,000 students dead. Large-scale corruption added greatly to the disaster. Officials and contractors skimmed funds, used below-standard quality materials, and hired unqualified workers. 5.5 million houses were damaged, all due to shoddy building practices. Remarkably, older structures seem to have fared better against the tremors of the earthquake, exposing the flaws in newer buildings. Public outrage led to 7,000 officials being indicted, but attempts to reveal the truth faced resistance. Parents and activists harassed and detained. The final death toll following the Sichuan quake was over 68,000 people. It became clear that this had been a long time coming. At this point, you might be wondering, why are there so many tofu dreg incidents? And why do they all happen in China? These issues do exist in the West too, and I'll get into that later. But there's a specific reason they're more common in China. In the late 90s and early 2000s, China had a housing boom fueled by government policies letting local governments profit from land sales. Cities grew rapidly, homeownership soared, and buildings went up fast, often sacrificing quality. Developers sold unbuilt apartments to fund new projects, creating a cycle dependent on rising property prices. Speed became the priority over quality, with developers pressuring architects and contractors to finish projects quickly. Corruption crept in, and some developers cut corners to save costs. This phenomenon was amplified as more buildings, neither durable nor safe, popped up. The 2020 Three Red Lines policy exposed the over-leverage of massive development companies like Evergrande, leading to its default on over $300 billion in debt. This left many projects unfinished, and buyers who had invested their life savings into housing stranded. It's a summer night in Surfside, Florida. From the coziness of his bed, a boy suddenly finds himself buried under a pile of iron and concrete. Woken up by the thundering noise, dozens of sleepy occupants hurry into their balconies to investigate what sounded like an earthquake. The noise came from Champlain Tower South, a 12-story beachfront condominium. Much like the tofu buildings in Sichuan, this disaster was bound to happen. Over the years, problems like rust, structural damage, and ignored warnings kept adding up. An earlier inspection highlighted severe waterproofing issues caused significant structural damage, but repairs were delayed until the collapse. One thing was clear: 98 people lost their lives in an instant, sacrificing human safety for profit. If you want to know more about the Surfside collapse, you can watch my video on it. It's linked in the description. There's one more natural disaster that showed the devastating consequences of what happens when a government enables unsafe construction. In 2023, a massive earthquake hit Turkey and destroyed 85,000 buildings. How was this possible? President Recep Tayyip Erdogan had driven a massive construction boom, increasing housing permits despite warnings. In 2019, the government legalized thousands of buildings that didn't meet standards as long as fines were paid. This amnesty meant that up to 75,000 unsafe buildings in the earthquake-prone area were given the green light, setting the stage for disaster. When the earthquakes hit, an estimated 85,000 buildings either collapsed or were severely damaged, many of them due to non-compliance rather than just the quake's force. The president claimed that most were built before the 2000s, but even new structures collapsed as well. Tragically, the disaster led to the deaths of 44,000 people and left tens of thousands injured. The aftermath saw over 100 developers and builders arrested. Please check out Ground News, and thank you for watching till the end. Watch this episode next if you found this video interesting. Please add a like and leave a comment if you want to support the channel.